Ashcombe Hall stood atop the green hills of Yorkshire like a monument to pride. Its towers pierced the grey Victorian sky, its stone walls carried centuries of noble history, and its master, Duke Reginald Ashcombe, believed every inch of it existed for one purpose: to pass from father to son. On a cold autumn morning in 1872, the grand drawing room filled with anxious silence. Servants moved carefully. Doctors whispered. Family members waited. The Duchess, Eleanor Ashcombe, had just delivered her fourth child. Reginald stood before the fireplace, staring into the flames. His younger brother, Lord Cedric, cleared his throat. "Whatever happens, brother, be grateful. Healthy children are a blessing." Reginald did not even turn around. "I need an heir." The door opened. The physician stepped inside. His face told the story before his words did. "A healthy daughter, Your Grace." The room fell silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Reginald slowly closed his eyes. "A daughter. Again, 4 daughters. No son." The physician continued nervously. "The Duchess is recovering well." Reginald turned. His expression was colder than the autumn rain striking the windows. "Leave." The physician hurried away. Cedric frowned. "Reginald, leave." One by one, everyone obeyed. Hours later, Eleanor rested in her chambers when the Duke entered. She smiled weakly. "Would you like to see her?" He remained standing. "I have seen enough." The smile vanished. Eleanor looked at him carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means Ashcombe Hall has no future." Her face paled. "Reginald, you knew what was expected." Shock flashed across her eyes. "What was expected?" she whispered. "As though I command God's will." He looked toward the cradle without affection. "The estate requires a son. The estate has 4 beautiful daughters. The estate has a problem." The words struck harder than any slap. Eleanor slowly sat upright. "You are speaking about your children." "No," he replied. "I am speaking about the end of my family line." For the first time in their marriage, genuine disgust entered her eyes. Years earlier, she had admired his confidence. Now she saw only arrogance. "Our daughters are intelligent. They are girls. They are Ashcombes. They are not heirs." The room became unbearably quiet. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "If this is disappointment, I can endure it. If this is grief, I understand it. But if you expect me to apologize for our daughters, I will not." Reginald's jaw tightened. "You always mistake stubbornness for virtue, and you mistake cruelty for strength." The Duke stared at her. Then something changed, something dark, something final. The next morning, the household gathered in the great hall. Servants lined the walls. Relatives watched nervously. Even Eleanor had not been told why she had been summoned. Reginald stood at the top of the staircase. His voice echoed through the chamber. "I have reached a decision." Eleanor felt a chill. The Duke unfolded a document. "Effective immediately, the Duchess Eleanor Ashcombe will reside outside Ashcombe Hall." Gasps erupted. Cedric stepped forward. "Have you lost your mind?" Reginald ignored him. "The Duchess will be granted a modest allowance and accommodation at Rosemere Cottage." Eleanor stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You are sending me away?" "The estate requires a different future." A horrified silence spread through the room. "Different future," Eleanor whispered. Reginald met her gaze. "I intend to seek a marriage capable of producing an heir." The words exploded through the hall. Several servants looked away in shame. Cedric looked ready to argue, but Eleanor lifted a hand. Slowly she stood. Her dignity remained intact despite the humiliation. "You are casting aside your wife because she bore daughters." Reginald said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, but none fell. She would not cry before him. Not today, not ever again. She looked around the hall that had once been her home. Then she spoke words nobody would forget. One day,
If
Your
we
Grace,
don't
you will
act
discover
now,
that an heir and a
everything we
legacy are
have
not the
built
same
will be
thing.
lost.
Reginald laughed
You
quietly.
must
The difference
listen
is
to
irrelevant.
reason before
Eleanor
it is
turned
too
toward the
late.
doors. As she walked away from Ashcombe Hall, carrying nothing but her pride and the future of 4 daughters, nobody noticed the elderly family solicitor watching from the shadows, and nobody heard him whisper, "The Duke has just destroyed the only branch of this family that deserved to survive." Rain followed Eleanor Ashcombe for most of the journey to Rosemere Cottage, as though even the skies mourned what had happened. The small stone house stood several miles from Ashcombe Hall, surrounded by wild hedges and empty fields. Compared to the grandeur of the ducal estate, it seemed painfully modest. Yet when the carriage stopped, Eleanor lifted her chin. "We are home," she said. The eldest daughter, Victoria, only 12, studied her mother's face carefully. Even at a young age, she possessed a sharp intelligence. "Will father come for us?" Eleanor paused. "He has made his choice," the answer was enough. Inside, the cottage was clean but sparse. The allowance Reginald had granted was just enough to avoid scandal, not enough for comfort, not enough for dignity. The following weeks became a lesson in survival. Bills arrived, servants departed, jewelry was quietly sold. Furniture disappeared one piece at a time. Eleanor never complained. Each evening she gathered her daughters beside the fireplace and read poetry, history, and philosophy by candlelight. If they could no longer inherit wealth, they would inherit knowledge. One afternoon, a former friend from London arrived unexpectedly. Lady Margaret Finch stepped from her carriage wearing silk gloves and a sympathetic smile that felt almost insulting. "My dear Eleanor," Eleanor welcomed her inside. After several awkward pleasantries, Lady Margaret finally revealed her true purpose. "The city is talking. I assumed it would." People are shocked, only because they imagine such cruelty belongs to strangers rather than husbands. Lady Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "There are rumors the Duke intends to remarry soon." The words hung heavily in the room. Even now it hurt. Not because Eleanor loved him anymore, because 20 years of devotion had been discarded as though they meant nothing. "Then I wish him happiness," she replied calmly. Lady Margaret stared. "You don't mean that." "No," Eleanor admitted. "But I refuse to let bitterness become my identity." Meanwhile, at Ashcombe Hall, Reginald was already pursuing his new future. Within a year, he announced his engagement to Lady Beatrice Holloway, a much younger aristocrat whose family desperately needed money. The wedding became the season's most discussed event. Some praised the Duke's determination. Others whispered that he had traded loyalty for ambition. Reginald ignored them all. The only opinion that mattered was his own. Months later, Lord Cedric visited Rosemere Cottage. He arrived carrying parcels of books and food. Victoria greeted him warmly. The girls adored their uncle. Inside the sitting room, Cedric sat across from Eleanor. "You look tired." "I am tired. You should challenge him." Eleanor shook her head. "To what end? He humiliated you before all of England, and England witnessed it." Cedric frowned. "That is not justice." "No," Eleanor agreed quietly, "but justice often arrives late." For a moment neither spoke. Then Cedric reached into his coat. "I have something for you." He handed her a folded document. Eleanor opened it. Her eyes narrowed. It was a copy of an old family trust, one she had never seen before. "Where did you find this?" "The family solicitor." She continued reading. Several clauses appeared unusual. One section, in particular, referenced inheritance rights under extraordinary circumstances. The language was old and complicated, almost forgotten, almost hidden. "Why show me this?" Cedric leaned forward. "Because Reginald believes he controls the future. And sometimes errant men stop reading after they find the sentence they like." Eleanor studied the document again. Questions began forming. Questions that had never existed before. As Cedric prepared to leave, he looked toward the daughters laughing outside the cottage window. "They're remarkable girls," Eleanor smiled softly. "Yes, one day he will regret what he threw away." For the first time since leaving Ashcombe Hall, Eleanor allowed herself a small measure of hope. Not hope for revenge, not yet, hope that her daughter's worth would one day become impossible to deny. Far away, beneath the towering ceilings of Ashcombe Hall, Duke Reginald celebrated the beginning of his new marriage. He believed the hardest chapter of his life was behind him. He had no idea that the first cracks in the Ashcombe dynasty had already begun to form.
Before we continue, let me ask you something. If you were Eleanor, would you have forgiven a husband who cast you aside simply for giving birth to daughters? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable aristocratic dramas, family sagas, and powerful stories of justice, just like this one.
The years passed more quickly than Eleanor expected, and more slowly than she desired. Rosemere Cottage never became wealthy, but it became something far more important. It became a home built on purpose instead of pride. Victoria matured into a disciplined young woman whose intelligence often surprised scholars twice her age. She devoured books on law, economics, and estate management. The second daughter, Clara, possessed a fearless tongue and a sharp sense of humor. She questioned traditions others accepted without thought. "If men wrote the rules," she often said, "perhaps women should be the ones examining them." The third daughter, Margaret, was gentle and observant. While others spoke, she listened. While others judged, she understood. The youngest, Rose, grew into a gifted artist whose sketches captured emotions people struggled to express. Together, they formed a family stronger than anyone at Ashcombe Hall could imagine. One winter evening, Eleanor found Victoria studying estate ledgers borrowed from a local landowner. "You've been awake half the night," Victoria smiled. "I enjoy this. You enjoy numbers? I enjoy solving problems." Eleanor sat beside her. "You would have managed Ashcombe brilliantly." Victoria looked down. Years had passed, but some wounds remained. "Father never believed that." "No," Eleanor replied softly. "Your father never allowed himself to see it." Meanwhile, life inside Ashcombe Hall appeared perfect. Lady Beatrice had finally given Reginald what he wanted, a son, Edward Ashcombe. The birth sparked celebrations throughout the estate. Church bells rang, champagne flowed. Newspaper announcements praised the arrival of the future Duke. Reginald walked through the halls with renewed confidence. His heir had arrived. His legacy was secure. Or so he believed. Yet beneath the celebrations, problems were quietly growing. Beatrice cared little for estate affairs. Expenses increased, investments failed. Several industrial ventures approved by Reginald produced disappointing returns. For the first time in decades, Ashcombe finances began showing signs of strain. The Duke dismissed every warning. "Ashcombe has survived wars and recessions," he declared during one family meeting. "It will survive temporary setbacks." But Lord Cedric wasn't convinced. "The world is changing, Reginald." "Nonsense. Railways are reshaping trade. Industry is replacing old wealth." "You should adapt," Reginald scoffed. "Old families do not adapt to trends." Cedric left frustrated. The Duke's arrogance was becoming dangerous. Back at Rosemere Cottage, adaptation had become a way of life. The daughters earned scholarships, taught lessons, sold artwork, and built valuable connections throughout Yorkshire. People admired them, not because of their title, because of their character. One spring afternoon, Eleanor received an invitation to a charitable gala in Leeds. At first, she hesitated. She had spent years avoiding aristocratic society. Then Clara laughed. "Why should we hide? We've done nothing wrong." The family attended. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and silk gowns. For many guests, it was the first time seeing Eleanor since her exile. Whispers followed her arrival, some pitying, some curious, some ashamed. Then something unexpected happened. Several prominent businessmen approached Victoria seeking advice on land development projects. Artists gathered around Rose's paintings. Margaret's charitable work earned public praise. Even Clara became the center of several lively discussions. For the first time, Eleanor watched society admire her daughters openly, not despite being women, because of who they were. As they prepared to leave, an elderly gentleman stopped Eleanor near the entrance. She immediately recognized him, Harold Whitmore, the Ashcombe family solicitor. The same man who had watched her departure years earlier. His expression was grave. "Your Grace, there is something you must know." Eleanor's heart tightened. "What is it?" Whitmore glanced around to ensure no one could overhear. Then he lowered his voice. "The old inheritance trust I showed Lord Cedric was not the only document hidden in the archives." Eleanor stared. "What are you saying?" The solicitor's face darkened. "I'm saying the future ownership of Ashcombe Hall may not be as settled as Duke Reginald believes." And for the first time in years, the past began moving toward them once again. The revelation from Harold Whitmore lingered in Eleanor's mind for months. Despite repeated requests, the elderly solicitor refused to explain everything immediately. "Not yet," he said. "Too many pieces remain missing." The answer frustrated Victoria most of all. "If there is information affecting our family, we deserve to know it." Whitmore nodded. "And when the time comes, you will." For now, life continued. But life was no longer difficult in the way it once had been. Years of persistence were beginning to bear fruit. Victoria had become one of the most respected estate consultants in Yorkshire. Wealthy landowners quietly sought her advice, often without realizing she was the daughter Duke Reginald had discarded. Clara launched a publishing venture that specialized in educational materials for women. Her outspoken opinions attracted criticism from traditional aristocrats and admiration from everyone else. Margaret expanded her charitable networks across northern England, earning praise from civic leaders and industrial families alike. Rose's artwork found buyers in London galleries. The daughters were succeeding, not because anyone had handed them opportunity, because they had built it. One evening, as the family gathered for supper, Clara unfolded a newspaper. "You may enjoy this." Eleanor glanced up. "What is it?" Clara grinned. "A problem," Victoria laughed. "That could describe half the newspapers in England." Clara slid the article across the table. At the center of the page was a report on Ashcombe Hall. Eleanor immediately recognized the estate. The article described mounting financial pressures, declining agricultural revenues, and several failed investments. Silence settled across the room. Finally, Rose spoke. "Is father losing money?" "Apparently," Clara said. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Despite everything, none of them enjoyed seeing another person struggle. Even him. Eleanor folded the newspaper. "The consequences belong to your father." Yet privately, she felt no triumph, only sadness. Reginald had sacrificed his family to protect a legacy, and now the legacy itself appeared fragile. Meanwhile, inside Ashcombe Hall, tension filled every corridor. The Duke sat across from his financial advisor. The man's expression was grim. "You must reduce spending." "Nonsense, Your Grace." "I said nonsense." The advisor exhaled slowly. Several valuable properties had already been mortgaged. Industrial investments had collapsed. Tenant revenues had fallen, yet Reginald refused to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. His son Edward, now a young man, inherited much of his father's confidence but little of his discipline. He enjoyed expensive horses, lavish parties, and attention. Responsibility bored him. One evening, Reginald attempted to discuss estate management. Edward listened for less than 10 minutes before losing interest. There will be managers for all that. Reginald frowned. Managers serve, dukes lead. Edward shrugged. Then lead. The conversation ended there. For the first time, a small flicker of doubt appeared inside the Duke. Years ago, he had sacrificed everything to secure a male heir. Now that heir seemed alarmingly uninterested in earning the inheritance. Several weeks later, another blow arrived. At a prestigious economic conference in Leeds, Victoria Ashcombe delivered a lecture on modern estate management. The presentation was brilliant. Newspapers praised her insights. Industrial investors requested meetings. Landowners quoted her recommendations. By week's end, her name had become widely respected throughout aristocratic and business circles. Unfortunately for Reginald, he learned about it during a dinner attended by half the county. One nobleman smiled across the table. "Remarkable young woman, your daughter, Victoria." The room fell silent. Reginald's expression hardened. Another guest added, "Quite possibly the finest estate strategist I've encountered." The humiliation was subtle but devastating. The very daughter he had rejected for being female was receiving praise for the exact abilities he once claimed she could never possess. That night, unable to sleep, Reginald stared out the library window. For the first time in decades, Eleanor's final words returned to him. "One day, Your Grace, you will discover that an heir and a legacy are not the same thing." He dismissed the thought immediately. Yet it lingered. And far away, Harold Whitmore finally unlocked a sealed archive box hidden beneath Ashcombe Hall. Inside lay documents untouched for nearly 70 years. Among them was a name that could change ownership of the entire estate. The more Duke Reginald tried to secure Ashcombe's future, the more uncertain that future became. His son Edward was now 26 years old, handsome, charming, and widely admired at parties. Unfortunately, those were almost his only accomplishments. He spent lavishly, ignored advice, avoided responsibility, and treated the estate's finances as though they were endless. One rainy afternoon, Reginald summoned Edward to the library. The room smelled of old leather and fading wealth. Stacks of financial reports covered the desk. Edward glanced at them with obvious boredom. "You wish to see me? I wish to speak to the future Duke of Ashcombe." Edward sat heavily into a chair. "That sounds serious." "It is serious." Reginald pushed several documents toward him. "We must restructure portions of the estate." Edward barely looked. "Then hire someone. You are someone." The younger man laughed. "No. I'm your son." The words struck harder than Edward realized. For years, Reginald had imagined this moment differently. He had pictured an eager heir, a capable successor, a son who would protect everything generations of Ashcombes had built. Instead, he faced a man who viewed inheritance as a reward rather than a duty. After Edward left, Reginald remained alone for hours. For the first time, an uncomfortable comparison entered his thoughts. Victoria would have studied those reports. Victoria would have asked questions. Victoria would have solved problems. He quickly pushed the thought away, yet it returned again and again. Across Yorkshire, Victoria's reputation continued to grow. Industrial firms sought her expertise, railway investors consulted her, even members of Parliament requested meetings. One evening she arrived home carrying exciting news. "I've been invited to advise the North Yorkshire Development Commission." Clara nearly dropped her teacup. "That's enormous," Rose laughed. "I suppose you'll be running half of England next." Victoria smiled. "Only the sensible half." The room erupted with laughter. Eleanor watched quietly. Years earlier, she had feared for her daughter's futures. Now she watched them build futures far beyond what society expected. No title had opened those doors. Their character had. Several weeks later, Harold Whitmore finally arrived at Rosemere Cottage, carrying a locked leather case. His expression was unusually tense. Eleanor immediately noticed. What happened? We need privacy. The daughters joined them in the sitting room. Whitmore carefully opened the case. Inside were yellowed documents, old correspondence, trust agreements, and handwritten family records. Victoria leaned forward. Is this about the inheritance? Yes, the solicitor removed one particular document. The document was drafted 70 years ago by the 7th Duke of Ashcombe. Eleanor exchanged glances with her daughters. Whitmore continued. The Duke at the time feared that future heirs might prove irresponsible. Clara snorted. A wise man. Whitmore almost smiled. He created a dormant succession clause. Victoria's eyes widened. A dormant clause? The solicitor nodded. It states that if an acting duke places the estate in severe financial jeopardy through reckless conduct, trustees may suspend the traditional line of succession. Silence filled the room. Even Eleanor appeared stunned. That cannot be possible. It is. Victoria spoke carefully. Who becomes heir if succession is suspended? Whitmore hesitated. For the first time, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. That is where matters become complicated. He revealed another document. A sealed family register. Several names appeared. Most belonged to long-dead relatives, but one name had been circled recently. A name none of them recognized, Gabriel Blackthorne. Rose frowned. Who is that? Whitmore slowly removed his spectacles. That is exactly what I have spent the last year trying to discover. Far away at Ashcombe Hall, Edward attended yet another extravagant gathering. Wine flowed, music played, money disappeared. During the festivities, he signed several financial guarantees without reading them. By midnight, he had unknowingly exposed the estate to enormous risk. The consequences would not become visible for months. But when they arrived, they would shake the Ashcombe dynasty to its foundations. And somewhere in England, a man named Gabriel Blackthorne was boarding a train, carrying a worn leather satchel and a secret he had not yet shared with anyone. A secret tied directly to Ashcombe Hall. The collapse began quietly. At first, only accountants noticed, then bankers, then creditors. Within a year of Edward's careless guarantees, several business ventures connected to Ashcombe Hall failed spectacularly. Investors demanded repayment, loans came due, land values dropped. For the first time in nearly 2 centuries, the Ashcombe estate faced the possibility of genuine financial crisis. Duke Reginald sat in the library, reviewing reports long after midnight. His hands trembled slightly. The numbers no longer obeyed his confidence. Every solution seemed to create another problem. Every asset sold revealed another debt. Across from him sat Lord Cedric. The years had silvered both men's hair. Yet only one appeared exhausted. You should have listened. Reginald glared. I did what any father would do. No. Cedric's voice remained calm. You did what a proud man would do. The words stung because they were dangerous, not false. Dangerous. Reginald looked away. For decades he had blamed fate. Now he was beginning to suspect another culprit, himself. Meanwhile, Edward remained astonishingly unconcerned. When informed of the growing crisis, he simply shrugged. Markets recover. Not always, Reginald snapped. Then we'll sell something. The Duke stared at his son. Years ago, he had sacrificed Eleanor and 4 daughters for this heir. Now that sacrifice stood before him wearing expensive clothes and offering expensive ignorance. The realization settled heavily upon him. For the first time, disappointment outweighed pride. Several weeks later, Harold Whitmore requested a formal meeting at Ashcombe Hall. Reginald reluctantly agreed. The solicitor arrived carrying the familiar leather case. Cedric was present, so was Edward. Whitmore wasted no time. The estate's financial condition has triggered provisions requiring trustee review. Edward rolled his eyes. Lawyers adore paperwork. Whitmore ignored him. The review includes examination of dormant succession clauses. Reginald stiffened. The phrase immediately caught his attention. What clauses? Whitmore opened several documents. The clauses established by the 7th Duke. Silence followed. The old solicitor explained everything. The financial safeguards, the trustee authority, the hidden succession mechanisms, and finally, the existence of Gabriel Blackthorne. By the end of the explanation, Edward looked annoyed. Reginald looked furious. This is absurd. It is legal, Whitmore replied. My son is the heir. For now, the room went still. Edward sat upright. For now, Whitmore met his gaze. If trustees determine the estate has been endangered through prolonged recklessness, alternative succession rights may be considered. Edward laughed. No court in England would replace me with some stranger. Whitmore closed the file. Perhaps not. The uncertainty was worse than certainty. After the meeting ended, Reginald remained alone in the library. The walls suddenly felt unfamiliar. The portraits of former dukes seemed less like ancestors and more like judges. His eyes drifted toward an old family painting. A younger Eleanor stood beside him, beautiful, confident, loyal. Beside her were 4 little girls. He stared longer than he intended. Then something unusual happened. For the first time in 30 years, regret arrived without warning. Not dramatic regret, not tearful regret. Something worse, quiet regret, the kind that slips into empty rooms and refuses to leave. Elsewhere, Victoria received unexpected correspondence from London. The letter bore the seal of a prestigious legal chamber. Inside was a simple request. They wished to consult her regarding a complex inheritance dispute involving a major aristocratic estate. Victoria smiled at the irony. Little did they know she had spent most of her life living inside one. As she folded the letter, a carriage approached Rosemere Cottage. A tall man stepped down, carrying a weathered leather satchel. His dark coat showed signs of long travel. His expression was calm but determined. When Eleanor answered the door, the stranger removed his hat respectfully. My name is Gabriel Blackthorne. Eleanor's heart stopped. The same name from the hidden documents. Gabriel looked directly at her. I believe my family and yours have been connected for far longer than either of us realizes. The sitting room at Rosemere Cottage fell silent as Gabriel Blackthorne stepped inside. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, well-spoken, neatly dressed, and carrying himself with quiet confidence. There was nothing flashy about him, yet something about his presence commanded attention. Eleanor invited him to sit. Victoria immediately noticed the satchel he refused to place out of reach. A man carrying secrets often guarded them carefully. Gabriel looked around the room. I apologize for arriving unannounced. You have a remarkable name, Victoria replied. A faint smile crossed his face. So I've been told. Eleanor folded her hands. Mr. Blackthorne, I believe it would be best if we spoke plainly. Gabriel nodded. Agreed. He opened the satchel and removed several documents. Some were old, others appeared recently certified. All bore official seals. My grandfather spent most of his life investigating our family history. Victoria leaned forward. And he discovered that his grandmother was the eldest child of the 7th Duke of Ashcombe. The room froze. Clara blinked. That would make her part of the direct bloodline. Yes. Gabriel slid another document across the table. The problem is that her existence was hidden after a private marriage deemed socially unsuitable. Eleanor's eyes widened. A hidden branch of the family, one deliberately erased from history. Gabriel continued. The succession clause created by the 7th Duke included protections for descendants from every legitimate branch. Victoria quickly understood the implication. If the main line endangered the estate, alternative descendants could potentially be considered. The words landed like thunder. Not because Gabriel sounded ambitious, because he sounded reluctant. Rose studied him carefully. You don't seem excited by this. Gabriel laughed softly. I own a successful shipping company. I was perfectly content before any of this appeared. That answer earned everyone's respect. He wasn't chasing a title. If anything, the title was chasing him. Over the following weeks, meetings multiplied. Lawyers became involved. Trustees reviewed documents. Historians examined records. Genealogists verified bloodlines. To everyone's surprise, Gabriel's claims survived every challenge. The evidence was overwhelming. Meanwhile, rumors exploded throughout aristocratic society. At dinner parties, country estates, and London clubs, people discussed little else. A mysterious claimant, a struggling duke, an uncertain inheritance. The scandal grew larger each day. At Ashcombe Hall, Reginald received the news with fury. This is madness. Whitmore remained calm. The evidence appears legitimate. I don't care. You may have to. Reginald slammed a hand against his desk. For decades, his authority had ended arguments. Now it changed nothing. The documents remained. The trustees remained. The crisis remained. Even worse, newspapers began comparing Gabriel to Edward. The comparisons were not flattering. Gabriel had built a thriving business. Edward had accumulated debts. Gabriel was respected. Edward was tolerated. Gabriel had earned success. Edward had inherited privilege. Each article felt like another public humiliation. One evening, Reginald attended a formal gathering in York. The moment he entered the ballroom, conversations shifted. People smiled politely, then whispered behind fans and glasses of champagne. He heard fragments. Such a shame. The daughters were remarkable. Terrible mistake. Everyone knew except him. For years, society had feared the Duke of Ashcombe. Now society was judging him. The change was devastating. Late that night, he returned home exhausted. As he passed through a corridor, he noticed an old portrait covered in dust, Eleanor, painted shortly after their marriage. For several moments, he simply stared. Then he whispered something he never imagined saying. I was unfair to you. The empty hallway offered no reply. At Rosemere Cottage, Gabriel prepared to leave after another meeting. Before departing, he turned toward Eleanor. There is one more thing. What is it? His expression grew serious. The trustees are preparing a formal hearing. Victoria frowned. A hearing for what? Gabriel looked directly at her. To determine who truly deserves to inherit the future of Ashcombe Hall. And for the first time, the battle was no longer about blood. It was about worth. The hearing was scheduled at the Royal Chancery Hall in London. By the time the date arrived, the case had become one of the most discussed inheritance disputes in the country. Newspapers covered every development. Aristocrats traveled from distant counties to attend. Bankers, lawyers, industrialists, and members of Parliament filled the galleries. Everyone wanted to witness the fate of Ashcombe Hall. For Duke Reginald, the attention felt unbearable. For Eleanor, it felt surreal. 30 years earlier, she had been publicly discarded. Now the same society that watched her humiliation was waiting to hear her family's story. The hearing began with formal presentations from the trustees. Financial records were examined. Debt obligations were reviewed. Estate performance reports were presented. The evidence was devastating. Ashcombe Hall was no longer the symbol of stability it once had been. Years of poor decisions had weakened the estate considerably. Then came Edward's testimony. He entered confidently. He left much less so. Several trustees questioned him about investments he had approved. Others asked about debts. One requested details regarding estate management plans. Edward stumbled repeatedly. At one point, he admitted he had never personally reviewed several major contracts. The gallery erupted in whispers. The damage was done. When his testimony ended, even Reginald struggled to defend him. Next came Gabriel Blackthorne. The contrast was immediate. He answered every question directly. He explained business operations, trade routes, financial planning, employee welfare programs, and long-term investment strategies. The trustees listened carefully. Several appeared visibly impressed. Yet Gabriel surprised everyone, especially Reginald. When asked whether he sought the title of Duke, Gabriel shook his head no. The room fell silent. A trustee frowned. No, I seek fairness, not a crown. The answer spread through the hall. For the first time, many people understood that Gabriel's fight was not driven by ambition. It was driven by principle. Then the proceedings took an unexpected turn. One trustee called a final witness, Miss Victoria Ashcombe. A murmur swept through the audience. Victoria calmly approached the stand. Reginald watched in silence. She looked so much like Eleanor it almost hurt. Questions began. Her achievements were discussed, her estate work, her financial expertise, her public service. The trustees asked whether she had ever desired Ashcombe Hall. Victoria considered the question carefully. Not ownership. What did you desire? She glanced briefly toward her father, then answered honestly. To be judged fairly. The words struck the room with extraordinary force because everyone knew she never had been. One trustee leaned forward. If circumstances had been different, could you have managed Ashcombe successfully? Victoria smiled faintly. I suppose we'll never know. Laughter rippled through the gallery. But Reginald did not laugh. For years he had convinced himself he made the necessary choice. Listening to Victoria, he felt that belief collapsing. Not because others challenged it, because reality challenged it. When the hearing adjourned, no ruling had yet been issued. The trustees required additional deliberation. The final decision would be announced in several weeks. Outside the hall, reporters flooded the streets. Questions flew from every direction. Predictions filled newspaper columns. Speculation dominated conversations. No one knew what the trustees would decide. That evening, Reginald sat alone in a London hotel. For the first time in his life, he examined his choices without excuses. He remembered Eleanor's loyalty, Victoria's intelligence, Clara's courage, Margaret's kindness, Rose's talent. He remembered everything he had thrown away, not because they failed him, because they were daughters. The realization shattered something inside him. Meanwhile, across the city, Eleanor stood at a hotel window watching the lights of London. A knock came at the door. She opened it. Harold Whitmore stood outside. His face was pale. What happened? The solicitor swallowed hard. The trustees discovered one final document. Eleanor's stomach tightened. What document? Whitmore looked directly at her. The document may change everything we thought we knew about who truly owns Ashcombe Hall. 3 weeks later, Royal Chancery Hall was filled beyond capacity. The trustees had reached their decision. Newspapers called it the most important inheritance ruling of the decade. Every major figure connected to the case was present. Duke Reginald sat rigidly beside Edward. Across the chamber sat Eleanor and her daughters. Gabriel Blackthorne occupied a seat near the front, appearing as calm as ever. The lead trustee rose. The room immediately fell silent. We have completed our review of the Ashcombe succession dispute. Every eye focused on him, he continued. Our investigation confirmed extensive financial mismanagement under the current line of succession. Edward lowered his gaze. The trustee opened a leather folder. We also confirmed the legitimacy of the Blackthorne lineage and its connection to the 7th Duke of Ashcombe. Murmurs swept through the audience. Then came the final revelation. The recently discovered document was a codicil attached to the original succession trust. Even Harold Whitmore appeared tense. The trustee carefully unfolded the document. The 7th Duke anticipated that future generations might become obsessed with gender and titles rather than stewardship and character. The gallery grew perfectly still. The trustee read aloud. If any future duke knowingly rejects a lawful member of his immediate family solely on the basis of gender, and such rejection results in demonstrable harm to the estate's long-term interests, trustees shall possess authority to bypass the responsible line in favor of descendants who have best demonstrated stewardship, wisdom, and service. Shock rippled through the room. Reginald's face turned pale. For a moment he seemed unable to breathe. The clause had existed long before he was born. Long before Eleanor, long before Victoria, the very ancestor he admired most had anticipated a man exactly like him. The trustee continued. Our findings conclude that Duke Reginald Ashcombe's decision to remove Duchess Eleanor and exclude his daughters directly deprived Ashcombe Hall of individuals who later demonstrated exceptional capability. No one spoke. No one moved. The truth had finally become public, not whispered, not suggested, declared. The trustee looked toward Victoria. Among all descendants considered, one individual consistently demonstrated the qualities identified in the trust. Victoria froze. Eleanor gripped her daughter's hand. The trustee smiled slightly. Miss Victoria Ashcombe. The room erupted. Some applauded. Others gasped. Several aristocrats stood. Reporters scrambled for notes. Reginald simply stared. The trustee raised a hand for silence. Ownership and stewardship rights of Ashcombe Hall shall transfer into a protected family trust administered by Lady Victoria Ashcombe, with provisions safeguarding future generations. More applause followed. Then something unexpected happened. Gabriel Blackthorne rose. I support the decision completely. The declaration silenced the room again. Gabriel smiled toward Victoria. The estate needs a steward, not another claimant. For the first time, Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Not because she had won, because she had finally been seen. The hearing ended moments later. People crowded around Victoria, congratulating her, praising her, celebrating her. But none of it mattered as much as what happened next. Across the hall, Reginald slowly approached Eleanor. For 30 years he had carried himself like a king. Now he looked like a man burdened by the weight of his own choices. When he finally stopped before her, his voice barely rose above a whisper. I was wrong. Eleanor looked at him quietly. For years she had imagined this moment, yet somehow it felt sadder than satisfying. Reginald lowered his head. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Ashcombe stood before the woman he had betrayed, with nothing left to defend. The ruling transformed Ashcombe Hall almost overnight. For the first time in generations, the estate was led not by tradition alone, but by proven ability. Victoria moved carefully. She refused celebrations that felt excessive. She rejected calls for revenge. And she made one decision that surprised nearly everyone. She invited her sisters, Gabriel Blackthorne, and several experienced advisors to help guide the future of the estate. One person nearly destroyed Ashcombe, she said during the first meeting. I have no intention of repeating that mistake. Under her leadership, neglected properties were restored. Debts were restructured. Tenant conditions improved. New partnerships with railway companies and manufacturers brought fresh revenue. Within a few years, Ashcombe Hall became stronger than it had been in decades. Newspapers praised the transformation. Business journals studied it. Even aristocrats who once dismissed women's leadership quietly copied her methods. Yet, while the estate flourished, Duke Reginald faded. The title remained his for life, but the authority attached to it was gone. The grand library where he once ruled now felt like a museum. Many evenings he sat alone beside the fireplace, staring into flames as much as he had the day his fourth daughter was born. Only now he understood what he had failed to see. One autumn afternoon, years after the ruling, he requested a private meeting with Victoria. She agreed. The meeting took place in the estate gardens, the same grounds where she had once played as a child. Reginald looked older than his years. The confidence that once defined him had long since disappeared. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I used to believe I was protecting Ashcombe." Victoria listened quietly. "I know. I convinced myself that everything I did was necessary." His voice weakened. "But necessity is often the excuse pride uses when it wants to feel noble." Victoria looked at her father carefully. The arrogance was gone, only honesty remained. Reginald swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" The question lingered in the cool air. Victoria considered it seriously. "No." The answer surprised him. "I was angry for many years, hurt for many more. But hatred requires energy I no longer wish to spend." Tears gathered in the old Duke's eyes, not dramatic tears. The quiet kind born from regret. "I lost all of you." Victoria nodded gently. "Yes, no argument, no denial, just truth." The truth hurt more. Reginald lowered his head. Of all the punishments life could have given him, this was the cruelest. Not poverty, not scandal, not public humiliation. The knowledge that he had willingly abandoned the very people who would have stood beside him. As the sun began to set, Eleanor joined them in the garden. Time had softened neither memory nor wisdom. Reginald rose slowly. For a moment he seemed uncertain. Then he spoke. "You were right." Eleanor smiled sadly. "About what?" His voice trembled. An heir and a legacy are not the same thing. For years he had chased an heir. And in doing so, he had nearly destroyed his legacy. Eleanor looked toward Victoria, Clara, Margaret, and Rose, who were laughing together near the terrace. Then she looked back at the man who had once cast them aside. "The tragedy, Reginald, is that you already had both." The old Duke closed his eyes, because there was nothing left to say. Ashcombe Hall survived, the daughters thrived, justice arrived, but some losses could never be recovered. And the man who had spent his life searching for a worthy heir ultimately became remembered for something else entirely. The day he failed to recognize the greatness already living under his own roof.
What makes this story so powerful isn't who inherited the estate. It's that the people who were rejected proved their worth without revenge, bitterness, or cruelty. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next historical drama. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.